impeded traffic abilities, I fear that a differential speed limit would certainly cause more trouble than it would solve, not just on I-80, anywhere. And again, it's enforcement. Anytime you have a law out there, if you're not going to be able to enforce it, drivers get complacent and they figure that, well, they're not enforcing this law anyway. Why do we need to worry about it? So I think anytime we have that discussion, we need to key in on the fact that we can do it as many laws or rules and regulations as we want, but if they're not enforced, they become unenforceable practically. On the issue of communicating with commercial drivers, that is a huge issue and one that we have tackled both as an industry and with the Transportation Safety Coalition. When WYDOT first employed the use of the overheads and the variable message signs for advising drivers of what the wind gusts were, pretty much all we ever saw was high winds. And I'm sure you were like me as I'm driving, trying to keep my vehicle on the road. I'm thinking, yeah, right. I can tell that. I don't really need a sign to tell me there's high winds out there. We urged them and they were very receptive and continue to be so. My members they need to tell us what those wind speeds are. Those of us that have driven in Wyoming know, okay, if it's this speed, yeah, that's going to be really bad. We really need to take some considerations. That's been huge, having those wind speeds on those variable message signs, and something that we hope WYDOT continues to do continuously. But I agree completely with Senator Culp. There is language barriers out there. And while commercial drivers are supposed to be able to speak and understand the basics of the English language, we don't know exactly what that level is for every driver that's out there. We had talked during Transportation Safety Coalition meetings, if there was a way to do some kind of not even language, not even words, if there was some kind of symbol that we could do that would tell someone, I mean, if we're going to have a rolling truck or something like that, that might be a good message. But right now, the message signs that, unless I'm wrong, and I've not updated again recently, but that's not possible with the current message signs that we use in Wyoming. But certainly going forward, if we can get that kind of communication, I think that's important. Both with the high wind warnings and the blowover warnings, I can tell you that a lot of my members, and I think we put this message out to other state associations. So I think some of their members that travel through the state of Wyoming as well use the commercial vehicle portal, which is a web portal that WYDOT has available to commercial vehicle users that talks to them about weather forecasts, road closures, what's coming up. There are long-term forecasts, weather forecasts, and that type of thing, so that carriers can use to plan their routes, to plan their trips through Wyoming, to say, oh gosh, this is not going to be a good storm. Maybe we need to rethink and maybe take that load a little bit earlier or postpone it and take it a little bit later. So that's a huge plus for carriers that are operating in the state of Wyoming, not just Wyoming domicile carriers, but those that are operating through, because they have access to that information and it's real-time access. And from the carriers that I know that are using it, they're very pleased with that system and that it's been a lifesaver for them a lot of times. And just want to kind of give a plug also for the YTAP program for being able to use closed roads. That's not just limited to passenger vehicles. It's available to commercial vehicles too. WYDOT has been very receptive about working with carriers when there are road closures. And if there are local carriers that just need to get to a certain point and not travel on, they're more than happy to work with them to try to figure out how they can get them from point A to point B. So I think a lot of the issues that we've talked about this morning and both the information that WYDOT has given you, as well as some of the questions that you have asked them, it comes down to drivers' decisions. And so that can be a problem. And we hope that most drivers are going to make the right decision. But a carrier can only go so far once they have turned that load over to that driver, and then he needs to get from point A to point B. So he's going to make some of those decisions. I think the more information we can give to them, I think the more we can readily communicate with them, it helps them make better decisions. And I think that's kind of the key issue on a lot of these. And certainly ways that the industry is looking to try to deliver messages as well. We try to keep in close contact with other state trucking associations and keep them advised of what's going on in each other's states. And so that they can get that message out to their carriers. Most are in very good communication with their drivers, but it still becomes a driver's decision as they make those decisions on the road. I think most of the things that you had questions about as far as driver communications, the variable messages, differential speed limits, I think I've covered that. I'm certainly open to more questions on those issues.
Okay. Thank you, Sheila. Any questions, Committee for Truckers Association? Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair.
Okay, so on the variable speed limit, I think we hear pretty, unanimous consent that it's not a good idea. I'm wondering, I'll pose the same question I posed to YDOT. What does your industry think about a minimum speed limit to make sure that we avoid that differential speed between, any traffic, all traffic, including commercial traffic? Say, for example, on A, you require a minimum of 70 miles an hour, which might not be best for fuel efficiency, but would increase safety.
Sheila?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I'm certainly willing to visit with my members about that. That's not a discussion we've had on minimum speed limits. While on the face of it, it's probably a good idea, I think there would be inherent issues because you do have fleets that have governed their trucks at less than 70 miles an hour. Or so to figure out what that speed is where you aren't going to then actually limit a carrier from using a road because they're already governed at a certain limit. We're certainly open to that discussion, and I'll be happy to take that discussion back to my board and find out what their opinion is on that.
Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Getting back to information being conveyed to truck drivers, would there be a mechanism that we could use the port of entries, because it's mostly intrastate trucking, that would alert that basically they know how much they weigh, all right, when you go through the port, providing you didn't pick a load up, but they generally know how much you weigh. And then you'd be tagged as a lightweight vehicle. And then they could send out in fact, text message, which I think most folks now have a way of communicating while they're on the road, to tell that person emphatically that you are restricted on driving on X amount of roads, certain ones that's been identified, be it I-80 or wherever it may be, where there's a high wind warning that they've decided it's not safe for high profile lightweight vehicles, that they could have a messaging system set up somehow that would convey that to the truck driver to better inform them, more explicitly inform them about the dangers out there. What were your thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, I don't think that's an impossibility. And I think it has some merit for discussion. How that would actually work, I think would take some work. But I think, again, the communication is absolutely vital. One of the challenges, again, is going to be what was brought up in your previous discussion with YDOT, is identifying exactly where is that limit? What is that weight? What is that sweet spot in that weight that we're going to restrict drivers from, traveling on that road and communicating to them that they should not be traveling on the road. But I think any kind of communication that can give even through the ports of entry itself, I think it is an improvement, just so that they know that those drivers that are there, that are headed east or west on I-80, there are issues today. And if you at this weight are out there, you may blow over, and there are restrictions for blowovers right now. And getting that communication there, I think is important.
Committee, any further questions for Ms. Furch? Yes, Co-Chair.
Well, along those lines, I think we heard some discussion about how maybe there's an incentive for those drivers to continue past the, when they shouldn't. And I'm just wondering, it seems like either maybe the industry would be in a position to eliminate those incentives and to make sure and do what Senator Cole was talking about and proactively say, hey, you're not driving on this piece of highway. And that it strikes me as not something that'd be from a technical standpoint would be achievable. And I think frankly, the alternative would be something that we were discussing is that we start looking at how we maybe start focusing on the drivers. Instead, I hate to put them in that position. If their company's saying one thing, you need to go, but you're going to be personally liable for however much of a fine if you do blow over, in addition to, having that experience of blowing over. Guess what? You're getting an extra however much fine as a person, as an individual. And so it is something that I think we're going to be taken seriously. And certainly, I hope we can get at least a bill draft going to help with the enforcement. I guess my message to you is I hope that the industry can do whatever you can do to ensure that, that enforcement is few and far in between. I guess I don't have a question there.
Yeah, that's okay. Ms. Furch, if you'd like to respond, you're more than welcome to.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I welcome that discussion. I think that is an important way to look at how can we solve some of those issues, because you're right. When you have someone who either doesn't understand or doesn't assume that it applies to them, or doesn't recognize, I don't want to say they don't know what they weigh, because drivers should, but if they don't recognize that, they're a light vehicle at that certain weight, or if the design of their trailer, because that has something to do with it as well, is going to make them blow over easier, then how do we get that message out? How do we make that clear to them that you're taking a risk here, and if something happens, there is going to be a heavy fine? Sometimes that's the message that gets their attention. And then usually when that type of enforcement is taking place, then that message gets out there and more people pay attention to it. It's an unfortunate thing that it has to come to that, but that's certainly a part of it. For communicating with carriers that are not domiciled in this state and making sure that they understand, we now have enhanced penalties, and whichever way it's directed, if they are driver enhanced or carrier enhanced, then, this is an issue. But keep in mind too, that anytime a carrier has an accident, doesn't matter if it was the driver's decision that led to that accident goes on their record. So, there's not just the enhanced fine, but it's the issue of, okay, this driver made this decision to go, or he was told to go, that if this happens, this is going to be on your record. So, carriers are very sensitive to that, because their safety scores are very important. Their insurance pays attention to their safety scores. Their shippers pay attention to their safety scores. So it's imperative that carriers do everything they can to be as safe as possible.
Seeing nothing further, thank you, Ms. Furch. Appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for your input on this important topic.
Thank you.
Before we move into public comment on this topic, I'd like to recognize Representative Tarver's been standing back there patiently, as well as Majority Floor Leader Nyman. And we also have Commissioner Willix in the audience with us. So thank you all for being here. I'm sure you guys had nothing better to do with your Friday than attend a Transportation Committee meeting. So with that, committee, we're going to open this up to public comment. We are on I-80 right now. However, it does look like we have quite a few people here that may not be on this topic. What I will say is we've got 15 minutes on our agenda as of right now. So we'll go ahead and open up public comment. We just ask to keep you brief, no more than 2 to 3 minutes, if at all possible. And we'd like to keep this committee on track with the agenda. Thank you. Representative Tarver.
Good morning, senators, representatives. How we doing today? All right, guys, quick question. How many of you are active commercial drivers? We got one. Okay, so I'm gonna go through a few of these CDL issues, ELD issues, speed differentials. The speed differential is great if you want more wrecks, okay? Because if you go up to Montana, you're going 55 and a 65. They're passing you constantly. Double lanes, it doesn't matter. No one cares about laws. If laws fixed anything, we wouldn't have any problems. That's the fact. Okay, we're talking about enforcing a blowover prevention. You guys have any idea why these guys are running when it's too windy? You think it's because they can't read? I guarantee it's not, okay? They're running ELDs. Okay, ELDs, here's how it works. Okay, you go get loaded. Let's say you're at the truck stop, you're in Denver. You go to get loaded. You start your clock at 6 a.m. You go down there, they can't load you till 10, okay? There's 4 hours of nothing. Okay, so now they're running behind. They got to get to Billings. They got to get wherever. They come into Wyoming, winds are high. Oh my goodness, I got to get there. I have to be there. So what are they doing? They're pushing the limits because we got more federal overreach, trying to regulate how we do it. Now, back in my day, when I first started in 95, you just take a cat nap for 4 hours. I'm sure you've done this. And then you would go ahead and put your 10 hours or 12 hours, 14 hours in. We've lost our common sense, fellas, and more laws won't fix that either. Okay. What are some other questions? The CDL issue. Okay, I cannot recruit young people to drive. They do not want to deal with all the headaches. I mean, it's just a constant barrage of getting pulled over. There's such a long list there. I don't even know where to get started. But anyway, for starters, young people that want to get their CDLs, it's very difficult to go get a CDL. It costs a lot of money. They don't have time. So I assume the next thing would be, well, maybe we could pay for that and help them get their CDLs. Well, that's great. So what do you learn at a CDL school? You learn how to pass the test. Okay, the test is the bare minimum. Left turn, right turn, back up, blah, blah. You don't learn nothing about strategic driving. Okay, I-80 is a mess. Why is it a mess? Well, most of these, I guess I don't know if I should say the trucking companies, but a lot of these over-the-road trucking companies, they hire the cheapest truck drivers they can get, okay? They're not professional truck drivers. They passed a professional truck driving test. That means literally nothing. They don't know how to bind their loads. They don't know how to drive on icy roads. They don't know diddly squat. And then of course they're fighting ELD laws on top of that. Then they're fighting trucks that are limited on their speed. They literally cannot stop. Doesn't matter if they got to go to the bathroom. Want to talk about that problem? They don't have time to stop. So they have to go on their Mountain Dew bottle and throw it out the window. Okay. More regulations are causing these problems. So to make more regulations to fix the problems that the previous regulations caused makes absolutely no sense to me, gentlemen, ma'am. Do you have any questions for me? Because I can go on for hours here.
Yes, Co-Chair.
Yeah, usually we have this problem with the military. You need to explain the acronyms because as you establish, there's very few truckers. And also, so who I'm assuming ELD means electronic, some sort of electronic log, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so who requires that?
Federal law.
Okay, so it's not the state, right?
Right.
Okay,
But you know how I feel about federal. So
that's great, but we're focused on what we can do at the state level.
I am
right?
too.
Okay.
I think we need to get rid of it.
Okay, so just like I said, just make sure you understand, as you point out, that, we're not truck drivers here.
Yes,
So
sir.
Make sure you explain what you're talking about to it. Okay.
Senator Tarver.
Co-Chair, thank you, sir. ELDs are it's just a new way to track our drivers. And it's so it was supposed to make it safe. And of course, what it has done is reverse of that. Now, the big, large trucking companies love it because they want to put this mom and pops out. Okay, mom and pops typically run on when they're tired, they pull over and take a nap. You cannot do that now because if you do, you'll miss your time zone. Okay, so you have to either have a second driver, which increases cost, or you just have to run against the law. And you're seeing more and more of that. So when I try to recruit a young person, I say, I need to get you to A to B by Friday because this is the amount of hours I got. That is no longer possible with ELDs because of the start time and stop time. Okay, once you start your clock on a day, you only have 14 hours to stop that clock. No matter if you don't drive for 10 of them, it makes no difference. That's a major problem. And I realize, this is federal stuff, but we have to start pushing back, guys. Wyoming needs to, I don't have the answers for you. I would love to help you with it, but there has to be a way to push back.
Committee, any further questions for Representative Tarver? Okay, thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
We are still on public comment for I-80 as it's related to a very kind of a larger, broader topic. If there's any further public comment for that. Commissioner Willicks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim Willicks, Transportation Commissioner, and most of you have seen me as a county commissioner the last 16 years. So I was appointed to the commission in March. So I'm very, but I can assure you that the conversations you're having are conversations we're having, collectively as a commission and YDOT. I'm not going to speak for the commission today, I only speak for myself, but I'm glad, and Senator Boner and I have talked about trying to make sure we get a transportation commissioner at your meetings. So I took lots of notes and follow up, and we're all doing that. I would, many of the questions you've asked, I've asked myself, and I've heard asked at our meetings, and we're trying to figure out a lot of this stuff. So I appreciate the I-80 as a challenge. The federal box, and it was alluded to here, but the federal box that we get because of our funding limits some of our options. And Senator Boney alluded to it. Some of the options we'd love to change may not be possible. And I'm just learning how all that mixes together. But you do have 3 commissioners that live along the I-80 corridor. There's one in Cheyenne, one in Rock Springs, and one in Evanston. So there are commissioners that are well aware of the vital to that. And the commerce part of it is one that I'm really tuned in. Director Reiner and I had a conversation a couple of years ago, and he had kind of done a back of the napkin math of what it costs us for every hour I-80 was closed. And Sheila referred to it. It's significant to the state and the country. I think the one thing that we might be missing is there's a ton of, and I get it mixed up, intrastate traffic on I-80 as well, particularly with the oil and gas industry. And so that's why the numbers I think Keith presented, that average is important. But, you got 12,000 in one spot. That's because they're going between Wamsutter and Rawlins. And that's a significant, and they may be out-of-state trucking companies traveling in-state for purposes. And so all those nuances add into what this means to solve it. So just wanted to be here. I'll be around for visual questions. I know the other topics, I've got a couple of thoughts that I can share as well, but just want to make sure you knew I was here, why I was here, and I assure you that we're going to be having these same conversations as we look at budgets and STIPs. And if they were easy, we wouldn't be having these conversations, but we continue to look at ideas. So I stand for 8 questions. I'm only just want to let you know here and going to take it back to the commission.
Any questions for the commissioner? Seeing
Thank you,
none,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Willicks. Any further public comment on I-80? Please, if you have any public comment, please go ahead and come on up and fill the seats so we can get to moving here. We've got about 8 minutes until we are into our next topic.
I want to thank you guys for doing the job nobody wants to do. So thanks for coming up. I just want to say with the highway patrol,
Sir, if
That
you
they-
can introduce yourself for
Shane.
the record, please.
yeah, Shane with the Wyoming Professional Towing Association,
Get your last name, Shane.
Shane Sweat. And so basically on that I-80 corridor, it has been blowing so hard this year that 55 years of living here, born and raised, 520 social security number. It's ripping what I call the eyebrows off my tow trucks. So when you got your headlight covers, your chrome piece that goes around it, it's ripping them off. That's how high it is. So not to be on the side of them, because I'm usually never on the side with the highway patrol. But in this case, it is so bad that is a true story, that the wrecks are bad because of weather that we haven't seen, which we know it changes over the years, but the wind is here and it's 111 in some places up there by Arlington. So, that's ridiculous wind. So I just wanted to take their side and tell them it's nothing we could do about it, unfortunately, but thank you.
Any questions for Shane? Thank you, Shane. Appreciate it. And committee, the other thing I'll say is, these come in ebbs and flows, but I can say thankfully that our death count on our roads is down this year compared to where we've been at. And we had a similar issue 5 or 6 years ago where our death count was, astronomically higher than what it had been in the previous years, similar to what you see with the graph with I-80 closing down. So different issues, different times. But the good news is we have less fatalities on our roads. And I think that's a testament to the amount of time we have closed the roads to keep the people safe. So with that, any further public comment? Seeing none. All right. We are about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. However, we have not taken a break yet this morning. So committee. Oh, yes, Mr. Co-Chair.
Do we want to discuss any possible bill drafts or anything like that? Or are we going to take a break first and then come back for I-80?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take we'll take a 10-minute break, and it'll be a true 10-minute break, not a legislative 10-minute break. And we will come back and do committee directives for this. So be back here in your seats at 10:35, please. All right, we're going to go ahead and come back to order. If I can get everybody, please take your seats. We're going to come back to order here. We do have Director Westby is going to give us a little bit more information, and he looks like he also brought some additional people to the bench. We are going to discuss a little bit more information along I-80 and some possible ideas for funding and what else we can do here. So I will, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and allow co-chairman. This has been a little bit of labor of love for the co-chairman, so I'll let him go ahead and take over this portion.
Labor of love is not how I describe it. There's been some labor involved, but committee, this is something that we've been handed by our management council. I think we all know the need. We've heard from industry, we've heard from YDOT about the condition of I-80, the safety issues on I-80. And the one theme seems to be for whatever reason, there's been a significant increase in out of state commercial traffic. And you look at those traffic numbers and, I think there's been a lot of focus on commercial vehicles, but I also point out that it looks like about all of 1% of the traffic on I-80 is domestic, like Wyoming based commercial traffic. And so I think it's a lot of that interstate traffic that is, I think, causing the most significant issues here and requires our most attention. And then, frankly, that's been our direction from our leadership. So a couple ideas we want to explore. I think one is the funding element, recognizing that we're going into a budget session and any bill that we start would have to start in the House. There's a couple ideas there that would not necessarily increase the tax burden or the fee burden or whatever on our citizens. And so two, I'd like to submit right now for the committee's consideration is severance tax distributions. Right now, well, you get about, there's like a 6% of that under the 155 million, that first 155 million of severance taxes that goes towards highways. We can look at increasing that distribution to highways, and basically the net effect would be potentially whatever amount we increase it, that's going to be 25%, excuse me, 2/3 of that would be diverted from the general fund and 1/3 would be diverted from schools, depending on how we do it. Of course, we can always, when we do it with the committee, we want it, but that would be a way of increasing funding to highways without increasing taxes on anybody. Another, I'll admit, more creative idea would be a fuel tax increase with a corresponding opportunity to deduct that increase from vehicle registration fees for our Wyoming residents. So it'd be a way of getting at, in the context of I-80, getting at some of that out-of-state traffic, which is doing a lot of the use of the roads and basically charging them a user fee and having it be net neutral to our citizens. Because that's the dynamic that we have. We are a very small populated state, a lot of roads to cover, and then frankly, the federal assistance, as significant as it is, I don't think quite covers it. So we talk about, pushing back against the feds. It sounds nice. I agree. I do it all the time in the context of energy development around here. Highways, not so much, but that'd be one way of recognizing the tough position that the federal government has put us in. Recognizing who's using the roads in the context of I-80 and trying to change the dynamic, frankly, where, all of our citizens pay fuel tax, we pay our registration fees. And I think we just learned, we'll find out for sure. I think a disproportionate amount of that goes towards I-80. And that affects all of us, whether we represent the I-80 corridor or not. And so there's the funding issue. I think Chairman Brown had a very good idea about incentivizing proper decision-making amongst, especially, it seems like we have a dynamic with some of these large commercial carriers where they're incentivizing their drivers to push the limits, I think was the phrase we heard from somebody in the industry. And so I think Chairman Brown had a pretty good idea to ensure that, we incentivize proper decision-making when it comes to high profile vehicle closures in the state as well. So, all right, so this is the part where we start considering, we heard problems. This is the part where we start considering solutions. And with that, I think Director Westby has some information about a variation on that second thing I talked about with a user fee and the possibility of having a selective, I guess, diesel fuel tax along the I-80 corridor, once again, with that similar dynamic of having our opportunity to reduce that particular user fee from vehicle registration fees. So obviously that'd be a new concept for YDOT and for industry. Just want to get YDOT's input on that to start. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. I just really briefly, we're the stateside funding that we get that comes from several sources. Federal mineral royalties, we get roughly 30% of the first 200 million, I believe it is. And then severance tax for like 4.3% of the first 155 million. And then we get some registration fees, and then we also get some gas tax as well. So those are kind of the major stateside revenue sources that we have. You pointed on potentially modifying the severance tax, modifying FMR, whether it's the percentage or you increase the cap, right? Or the first, line that you start taking those percentages. You talked a little bit about a tax differential, and in your submission or submittal, hopefully you got the memo on the variable fuel tax rate, and Wayne and Kim are here to talk a little bit if you'd like on that memo about some of the concerns that we have on the variable tax rate versus how we collect the tax at the rack versus then we would have to shift it to the point of sale. They can speak on that. The conversation that we had was, increasing the diesel gas tax, but having a rebate back to the Wyoming citizens on being able to rebate back. And so some of those topics, if that's where I heard you on. Okay, very good. If we can, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to Wayne to kind of talk about the memo briefly. And then answer any questions that you may have on that.
Yeah, briefly before you start, Wayne, committee, this is going to be in the back of your packet. If you haven't found it, this is back with the policies and procedures that YDOT submitted. So if you're searching for it, it's a little bit further back, but just to kind of give the committee a little bit of guidance where this is at. So with that, Wayne, the floor is yours, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Wayne Hassinger, fuel tax manager at YDOT. We provided the brief that we understood. The idea was to have a different diesel tax rate along the I-80 corridor, not knowing any specifics, but presuming some mile radius close to I-80. What we presented was not, no, we can't do that, or no, we don't want to do that, because we like to say we serve at the pleasure. So we're happy to do whatever the direction might be. Some challenges we identify is right now our tax is at the rack. So this would be changing the point where we collect the tax. Fuel tax is a tax on the ultimate consumer, so we all pay it at the pump. But we would be in a position to have to collect it based on the dealer where that dealer is. So then that would put some onus on the distributor, because they would be reporting one tax rate if they delivered it somewhere near I-80, and another delivery they sent somewhere on I-25 would be at 24 cents. So there would be some industry concern, we believe. Certainly we would ask the question about and above our pay grade, because we're not attorneys. Sometimes I play an attorney, but for this purpose, we would say we should probably, ask a real attorney if there's a consumer protection visa not to have a different tax rate in a specific location. For us, as far as administering the tax, be a little more challenging, right? We appreciate that. We are all in the same storm as far as being short on help. I like to tell people we're all in the same storm. we're in different boats and ours is a raft at this moment. So the administrative piece would be a little more challenging. It's nothing that we couldn't do, but it would be an added not only audit function, but compliance, right? Because we would then need to make sure that those retailers were collecting and remitting the higher tax. So with that, I think that hopefully that covers the memo. Stand for any questions. Kim's dying to answer a question. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, Co-Chairman.
Just real quick, can you explain what on the rack means?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the tax at the rack means it's at the terminal. That's when it comes, the rack is actually a physical rack where the fuel flows right over the rack. That's where the tax is collected. A lot of just, you know, for informational purposes, a lot of transactions can happen above the rack. And that's, the tax is not due there. It's when it comes over the rack. And that would be at the terminal. That's where the tax is collected. Although it is a tax that flows its way down.
Okay, committee, lot of heavy information there quickly. Any questions for Mr. Hassinger? Or Kim? Yes, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm intrigued by the concept, but I really would ask the question to you. Would it be imminently more a simpler task to in fact change it statewide instead of on the locality of whatever discrimination we may run into with I-80 corridor, and then the problems of people filling up beyond that area you've identified, which I guarantee you they'll have truck stops, and that's been my business for over 40 years is what we're talking about when it comes to fuel delivery. So I would ask you, I mean, if we're going to go down this road, personally, I'd rather see this be number one, a statewide situation, and then with the same rebate program. And obviously I think that may be something more viable because of the legal reasons and such. But what's your opinion about the ease of implementing a program that was statewide versus an I-80 corridor?
Mr. Hassinger, I will also give you the flexibility here to not answer with your opinion as YDOT, and that understanding that is absolutely a policy decision. However, I think maybe a question that could be answered is it more effective to levy this statewide as it is along the I-80 corridor?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that. Yes, I have no opinion, but Senator, yeah, from a tax administration position, it would be easier. I don't know if that's the right term, but it would seem like a better idea to raise the diesel fuel tax, period, rather than have it location specific. And I think there are 23 other states that have a higher diesel tax rate than they do a gasoline tax rate. So it would be, as far as administering it, and then the compliance as well. The compliance is going to be very challenging with a specific tax rate for a specific corridor. That will take more work to administer. So I think, not my opinion, right? But from an administrative point of view, yes, it would be better to raise the diesel tax, period. Thank you.
Any further questions for Mr. Hassinger or YDOT surrounding this area? Seeing none, you guys are back off the hot seat yet again. Committee, we're going to bring this back up to the dais here. Mr. Co-Chairman, do you have any recommendations, or anybody else on the committee have any recommendations and directions for staff for potential bill drafts? Yes, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm amazed sometimes at how the knee-jerk reaction to any situation is we got to have more money. And sometimes that is the answer. I'm an old soldier, and I was taught that when you're given a mission, there are no excuses. And so in looking at YDOT, for example, if they're given a mission and they're having trouble filling that mission, before we increase fuel taxes or before we try to take money from the WA and schools, why have we not discussed an internal audit of the allocation of the resources presently being used? Big thing in the military was cross-training. When you come in, the first thing that you learn is that you are first and foremost an 11 Bravo. Okay, that's an 11 bullet stopper. That is a foot soldier. Every soldier is a combat soldier first and foremost. Beyond that, you have your specialty. Mine happened to be a mechanic and a motor sergeant, a logistics specialist. But when the poo hit the fan, we all became soldiers. Well, the poo hit the fan this winter. And maybe I'm just off in fantasy Neverland. But if I look at it from a military perspective and I look in an administrative building and I've got 30 people in there pushing papers or whatever it is they do, and I'm not belittling those tasks. Maybe we need to cross-train some of those people and say, you know, this is how you drive a snow truck. Just a thought.
Co-Chairman Bonner.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that's why we have that last agenda item in policies and procedures and that's basically the same discussion I had with the director. If you're gonna take something, you better be able to give a little bit too. And so, yeah, it's hard to kind of get all those ideas into one agenda item, but I think that's absolutely part of the discussion and also why we're being very careful about, you know, finding a way to make sure it's net neutral to our citizens as well. That's why we're talking about those two specific ideas. But I agree with you. We need to, WIDOT is a very large agency and there's not a whole lot of opportunity that we have to influence their operations besides making law, but there's a lot of federal funds in there too that makes it hard, and it's a very, very large organization as well. So I agree with the overall sentiment. Unfortunately, we take this one up first, so here we are. So just like to point that out.
Thank you, Co-Chairman. Any further discussion and or committee bill drafts, directives?
Yeah.
Yes, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, I'm still wrapping my head around ideas of keeping interactions down, you know, and what are the solutions and where is the bill or what is the solution for us to think about that? And is it a tax? Is it a how we get people to be more professional, all people to be professional and respectful on I-80, just to keep those interactions down. And the speed limit changes. I don't think it's that speed limit change. It's that variation to stay here rather than here and get the high speeders in and out. And I still wrapping my head of what would be a great idea or what we could have LSO look at for us as some possible solutions and bills that talk about specifically that interaction. And I thought about what Representative Wiley said with that interaction piece of the 29,000 pound vehicles staying on that side, but that does it really create more? Does it bring that interaction piece closer to here? That's where I'm wrapping my head around this. And boy, I just like more information on what can we do before we write a legislation, but what can we do to keep those interactions down? And I don't know if anybody out there has ideas on that or.
Senator Cole.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask maybe a more profound question I didn't hear an answer to was, have we requested from the federal government a higher rate of reimbursement for the I-80 in this case? Let's just focus in on that to try to increase our funding, because it's really clear that this is all out-of-state folks that are causing the majority of our damage on our highways. I think we have a right to ask for more money because we are in fact a critical part of the I-80 system of transportation. So why would it be unheard of to ask for a higher reimbursement rate because of the facts that we can present? And I don't know if anyone's done that before on the request. But before I would really push for a taxation change modification, I'd like to know we've asked. And I suppose I could probably guess the response, but have we asked recently, and what is the status of that thought?
Mr. Chairman, I think every one of my staff are scared right now because they don't know how I'm going to answer this question. But, Senator, the one thing I do know about the funds that we get from the federal government is they are for improvements, not maintenance. So a lot of the conversation that was had, I think, Representative, you talked about, looking at cross training and that's on the state side dollars. That's the road maintainers. I can't take federal dollars, and do that maintenance side of the house. And so asking for an increase in federal dollars for I-80 would have to go for road improvement, that kind of dollar, not necessarily some of the issues that we're seeing on, yes, we can take federal dollars for I-80 to improve the situation, whether it be reconstruction, because putting lipstick on that, which is, I think the assistant chief was talking about grind and pave or whatever, that we patch and then grind and pave, patch and then grind and repave. That's preventative, right? Well, that only lasts so long. So at some point we have to get in and reconstruct the subgrade that's causing the deeper issues. So that would be a increase, potential from the federal government. But the ongoing issues that we're seeing is the state side dollars, not necessarily the Fed side dollars. We're getting relatively close to where we're not even being able to match the federal dollars that are coming in that we have available right now because we don't have the stateside match. Looking at the snow removal, just to go along this, why the dollars, and I swore up and down I would not come here complaining that I need more money. That's not my role right now. But we're over $10 million in our budget on snow removal this year. And that comes straight off the road maintenance that comes right off of that. You talked about cross-training some people. Totally, we did. There are several people within the engineering world or on the engineering side that went out and got their CDL to go help on the roadside. Like I said, we moved people down from District 4, District 5 to come down in District 1 and 3 to help out. But more importantly, I would not, as you do, and you do have a CDL, I would not want to go get a CDL because that would just increase the safety liability for the state of Wyoming. And as much as I would like to pitch in and go do that, just giving anybody a CDL and saying there's a, 100,000 pound truck with a big old blade or 2 or sometimes 3, go blade the road. That's from a safety perspective. I would not feel comfortable doing that, but I appreciate the cross training. I know that they did prior to me being here. I think even the director went out and got his CDL to try to help pitch in. Very admirable in what he did, but there's a safety issue that we have to go into, and I kind of digress, but I wanted to hit on that while it was hot, and thank you for your question.
Okay, committee, yes, Senator Furphy quickly, and then we're going to move on. We're starting to get behind schedule, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, what makes sense is a toll road on I-80. Charge the users of that highway, but we've tried that several times to get a bill passed with the toll road on the interstate, and we can't seem to get that done. But logically, that is what makes the most sense. So I think we can continue to consider that in the future, but we tried it again last session, so timing is probably not right now to try a toll road again. But if you think about it, that's what is logical. Thank you.
Okay, just for the committees, especially for those newer members, it is something that this committee has taken up 3, 4, 5 times. And I'll give a quick synopsis over the tolling so we can have this, we won't go into a deep discussion here, but ultimately there's two choices for tolling within the state of Wyoming. And one is a federal program which would allow us to toll the existing highway. That has been tried by multiple states, mostly out on the East Coast. And in order to do that, it requires you to go through a program, a very lengthy process, application process. Again, it's been done by at least 6 states, and not a single state has ever amounted to actually being able to toll the road because the federal government, surprise, surprise, has made it an incredibly difficult process. The only other way to create a toll road is to create your own road. And that would be basically a single lane. If we chose to toll a single lane across the entire state of Wyoming, the last I heard was about $3 billion to do one lane in each direction. And that's only if the people use it. And you still have 2 lanes that are free interstate, and trying to get people to utilize a toll road after you've built a lane and they can drive for free and just drive in the other 2 lanes. It does make sense. However, the mechanics of it are just not there. So there's a reason why it is unfortunately, well, or fortunately, however you look at that, that it has never made it past this committee and or out to the floor for serious discussion. So with that, we are going to open this up briefly for any discussion on bill drafts. And if we don't have any bill drafts, we will move on. Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd make a motion or a request for a bill draft to find out the appropriate level of a diesel tax increase in the state of Wyoming, with the caveat or the provision that the tax increase will be neutralized by I don't know, we call it a rebate program for the sake of using that word at the time. However, we can do this legally in the state of Wyoming.
Second. And there's a second. So we had Senator Kolb with it, and Co-Chairman Boner is the second. Any discussion? Representative Stiver?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When you're discussing the rebate, are we going to lower the registration fees for all vehicles?
Senator Kolb?
And Mr. Chairman, to answer that question, I envision that's possibly one mechanism. I think we should research it and have the LSO look into what would work. But this is all predicated on the fact that it will not increase the cost to Wyoming citizens, I think, in companies. That's another discussion. But the envisioned situation is neutrality on an increase in fuel cost to folks in the state of Wyoming.
Okay. LSO, does that give you guys enough direction? I'm seeing maybe some raised eyebrows. And so I am a little concerned. I just want to make sure that we give you guys enough direction.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think to some extent that the question of how the mechanism of a rebate is a policy decision. I think to some extent, there's certainly, any bill that we prepare, we will analyze it to, if there are any legal issues with that. But I think in the first instance, it would be helpful for the committee to, provide that direction as a matter of policy.
I agree. So Senator Cole, go ahead and let you
to further
amend that.
clarify, work on the rebate being as per vehicle registrations. Please.
And this would be solely to diesel powered vehicles too, then at that point.
Yes, Mr.
So,
Chairman.
okay. Committee. Yes, Representative Berger.
Just a quick question, clarification, not just private citizens, but also companies in Wyoming that are usually using their
It would, yes.
I
it
don't
would
wanna
be any
hurt them.
diesel. It would be any diesel powered vehicle. so
any,
that's registered in the state of Wyoming.
okay.
Yep. And so again, this is just conceptual. This is for draft for LSO to put together. We'll have the discussion deeper when it comes to the
This is
actual
just a
mechanics.
conceptual, and then we'll take a look at the bill as we see the bill. come
Absolutely.
in.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think for now, without further direction, we would leave that amount blank.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Committee, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the proposed bill draft, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those no?
No.
That motion passes. All right. Any further bill proposals? Yes, co-chairman.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I move that we get a bill draft going that would enhance penalties for violations of high profile lightweight vehicle closures. That includes an increase in the fine. We'll leave the amount blank for now because I don't know what it is, but also have an element in there where the fine is levied against the individual driver, not, and it cannot be leveled against the company.
We have a second.
I'll second it, but I have an amendment.
Okay.
To add to it.
So
Yes.
Representative Stivar with the second, also.
And the amendment is to add in there, I don't want to put this, the speeding of over 100 miles an hour. If the speed is over
20 miles an hour.
20 miles over the posted speed limit, is they need to go see the magistrate or judge and increase them fines too.
Okay, I think that's probably that's a separate style of a bill. We're looking at strictly high profile.
Okay.
Unless you do want to include that.
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we'll, it's probably best if we have a separate bill draft, but if Representative Stivar makes that motion a little bit, I'll second it. How about that?
I'll make that motion in a minute and I'll pull my.
I wanted to second it.
Okay, all right. So the motion is LSO, we would currently have a bill draft to enhance penalties on high profile vehicles that go around the road closures, and also there would be an enhanced penalty for truckers only. Are you looking at that, or is this we're gonna do a fines for everybody? So an enhanced penalty for anyone exceeding 20 miles an hour over this posted speed limit.
No, that's just not yet. Not yet.
Oh, you're doing a second bill draft. Okay, my apologies. So we're just going to stick on the first bill draft here for the high profile. So any further discussion on the high profile? Yes. Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The co-chairman said he didn't know how much the current penalty was. I don't either. I would like to know, have some idea of how stiff that is. Anybody know?
We will have that information on the next roundup if we have this bill draft come forward. We'll
Mr.
take a
Chairman?
look at that. Yes.
Yep. If you fail to observe a sign for a closure, I believe it is $750 fine or imprisonment up to 30 days.
Representative Smith.
Can we find out how much like cleanup cost, and just be responsible for how many troopers were on the scene, reimbursements to fire departments, EMTs, and things like that as a penalty, that they would be responsible for all costs associated with towing and storage of the towing abandoned vehicles and so forth.
I think that's a great idea to have that included. So LSO, does that give you guys a little bit of an understanding for any associated costs if vehicle goes over? I do worry about that being levied on, whether that's levied on the operator or the owner or the producer that's actually driving the truck. So I guess if you want to make that would need to be a motion. An amendment, yeah. Senator Pappas?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just to be clear, is this only for the enhanced penalty? Is this for ignoring the signs, for blowing around the signs only, or are we actually including also a penalty for violating the low weight or the lightweight vehicles? Because if we're going to put a penalty on that, then we're going to have a definition of what we consider a lightweight vehicle. We don't have that right now, as I heard. His testimony was that we don't have definitions in law for that.
Co-chairman?
Right, yeah, the motion was specifically for violating the lightweight, high profile vehicle closure. And so, yeah, it's at this point, I don't have a bill draft, with that level of detail in mind. That's why we're authorizing LSO to work on it. So, yeah, it would be set for that specific instance of lightweight, high profile vehicles, not any and all, just going around the bar when it's down and the road's closed.
And we do have. And Senator Pappas, we do have as was alluded to in testimony, we do have the availability of finding at that point already. So this would just be enhancing that penalty.
Okay, but I see two issues here. Enhancing the penalty for anyone who goes around the sign, right?
No,
That's one issue.
we're doing strictly high profile vehicles when the road is closed to high profile vehicles.
Okay.
Question. You have a question? Yes. Representative Pendergraft. I thought maybe you were hopefully calling for the question.
No, I do have a question. We're talking primarily here about commercial vehicles, but I see a lot of private vehicles out there, big buses, campers, that sort of thing. Do we include them?
This would be inclusive, yes. And so I don't want to get into the nitty gritty on this as it's a conceptual draft. So if we have any discussions over the conceptual draft, we can get into the discussion of that in our next meeting. But do we have any further discussion on the draft itself? LSO, have you got enough information from us?
I think so, Mr. Chairman. I think to that last question, one of the committee's considerations would need to be a definition for what is or is not a light high profile vehicle.
Yep. If you can include just a section in there when drafting, and you can leave that open, and if we can get some research from LSO on what some other states have done, NCSL or CSG, that would be helpful too. Okay, committee, all those in favor of the bill draft as presented to be posted for our next committee meeting, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. All right, that motion passes. Committee, do we have anything further? Yes, Representative Stibar.
Yes, I request a bill draft on the speeding. Anybody traveling over 20 miles over the posted speed limit needs to see the judge and the fines increase.
Okay.
We've had too many doing over 100 miles an hour.
Second. Okay, second. All right. Yes, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, I thought there was a higher penalty for driving over 100 miles an hour, and that's probably maybe a YDOT question. I don't know. I just always had heard that there was an enhanced penalty already. And I already had heard if you exceeded a certain amount of speed, that you in fact were liable to go to jail. So I'd like to hear what the current law is.
Well, seeing that our colonel is not here and Captain Wyrick may or may not have that information, we'll bring him forward. But one of the other considerations that I'd like the committee to understand is this was not one of our charged topics for enhancing penalties on anything other than what we're looking for I-80. And I will go ahead, we'll allow this to go for a vote, but this is also not one of our charged topics for Management Council. Therefore, this would not be a high priority for this committee to be bringing forward in a budget session. But Captain Wyrick, if you have any information on the bond schedule for anything over 100 or 20 miles an hour over this posted speed limit.
Mr. Chairman, committee. Once you exceed 21 plus miles per hour, the basic bond goes from 95 to 195 plus court costs and fees. And then for any vehicle over 36,000 pounds, it also increases the fine by over $300 for commercial vehicle or vehicles exceeding 39,000 gross vehicle weight rated.
Okay, thank you, Captain. Appreciate that on the spot information. You're quick at finding legislation on your phone. I'm impressed.
I'll withdraw that request.
That's okay. Okay, all right. LSO, that has been withdrawn. Okay. Committee, we are going to move on unless there's any other pressing issues that we have. Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We are behind by about 45 minutes, so we are going to try to crush through this as quickly as possible. However, this is a very important topic. So I do have YDOT back up here for I-80 issues, or I'm sorry, for CDL issues. We also have the Trucking Association. So Ms. Furch, if you would like to join, you're more than welcome. We can probably just have a discussion together. And it looks like we get Taylor. That you are just fine there, Director. And just if you would please state your name for the record, and we'll allow YDOT to take lead on this. And then Ms. Furch, thank you for coming up, and we'll try to address this all together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Taylor Rossetti, Support Services Administrator for YDOT. And we were given the pleasure of a broad topic of CDL issues. So we did try to pare it down. We did provide you guys some information with the downgrade process. There's a flow chart there that pulls in the idea of what the exemptions are or the exceptions are at the federal level for medical requirements and such, and how that interplays with how we interact here at the state. So that we'll cover that one in great detail. And then there was also some additional stuff later on that pulled in the concept of 18 to 20-year-olds operating hazardous material vehicles. And as we've worked through that issue, we have identified a federal requirement that actually probably preempts the state from even addressing that issue for intra-state commercial driver's licenses. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd actually probably turn it over to Ms. Zimmerman here, and because I think this may get into the weeds and she's the smart one. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Since you don't have a weed whacker, I suppose we'll go ahead and go over to Ms. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, my name is Misty Zimmerman. I am the Program Manager for Driver Services. As we started looking at these topics, obviously the things that have come up, and we took some time and we've talked a lot through this a lot. I think where we will start is the requirement for the retest after CDL downgrade and the time period that we look at that. And that's very similar to what this flow chart is for you. A commercial driver is required to certify to the type of driving that they will be conducting at the time of application and any time that that certification changes. If a person is required to have a DOT card, that DOT card goes onto their record as well as their SIDLIS record, which the commercial carrier group sees. 60 days prior to the expiry date of that DOT card, they receive a notice from the department that says, hey, your DOT card is expiring. Upon expiration date of that DOT card, we downgrade that commercial driver's license to a non-commercial driver's license at that point. We do not send a new credential because at the time that the driver provides us with the DOT card, we automatically restore that license. The caveat to that is if the person does not return a DOT card to us within 2 years, we require, in order for a driver to reinstate their CDL privileges, that they go through the testing process, both skills and knowledge test. That process is outlined in our rules and regulations, and that is the same process for every type of vehicle in Wyoming, so motorcycle, non-commercial, and commercial. That requirement that we have in rules and regs was established from there's a federal requirement for the testing on hazardous materials that says if a driver transfers into another state and they cannot provide proof that they've taken the hazardous materials test within the previous 2 years, they must retest. We look at that 2 years. If someone hasn't been driving a commercial vehicle or any type of vehicle, we want to ensure that that person can safely operate that vehicle. So that is where the 2-year benchmark has landed. We are in line with several states. Some states require more, some states require less time to pass before they require to retest. But we do feel that that 2-year period is a valid timeline to ensure that somebody in fact can safely operate a vehicle. And like I said, that is any vehicle in the state. So that walks through the downgrade process. Are there any questions about that process or our process to reinstate?
Seeing none, I think we can go ahead and continue on any further.
Okay, great. I think where the next one leads us is the ability in this flow chart to certify as exempt, which is kind of the lower path. In order to certify as exempt in the state of Wyoming, either intra or interstate, you have to meet certain requirements that are outlined in our rules and regulations, and they match our federal regulations. Basically, a member of the state and local government that has a position that requires them to have a CDL to perform the duties of their position. There's general exceptions that are based on farm covered vehicles, those type of things. We also, as a state, have a statute that exempts those persons from having a CDL specifically in the state. Private motor carrier, passenger, or transportation of migrant workers. And so those are the 4 categories that we will allow for a driver to certify as exempt in the either intrastate and that's exempt from the medical requirement. And so there has been some discussion that other states do allow that on a more broader term. After discussions with Taylor and with the directors, our stance is that as we walk through this process and we move, if we were to move away from that, we would potentially be non-compliant under the Motor Carrier Safety Administration Program, which is where most of our commercial carrier, we receive money through our commercial, the commercial carrier department receives money through them. Jurisdictions that are not MCSAP compliant or the Motor Carrier Safety Administration or Safety Assistance Program, there's several levels of penalties that come along with that. Part of the process is that they may remove funding, and that's where the biggest impact comes. Up to 50% of that mix-up funding can be removed for non-compliance, and you're going to hear mix-up funding and non-compliance a lot here in the next discussions. Last year, Wyoming Highway Patrol received just over $5.6 million in mix-up funding. That funding is used, and Captain Wyrick can probably attest to more so, but for special projects, high priority project funds, positions, speed control options, things at the port. So I'm going to let him, if you have more questions on that, answer those questions. But if we were to remove that requirement that we have to meet one of those 4 requirements, we would potentially look at not being non-compliant with the MCSAP program, and then potentially look at the loss of funding.
Brandy, any questions on this? And I'll refresh the committees. I'm seeing a couple of blank stares, and I just want to refresh everybody. What one of the portions of this was past couple of years, we've had propane shortages in the northeast part of the state, and trying to get deliveries of hazmat materials across the state. We were having troubles on this side of the state finding people that could fit that CDL license requirement. And so there was a discussion and a question asked both by the House Majority Floor Leader and the Senate President to look at what our opportunities were there to relax these requirements. And so that's what we've asked WYDOT to provide here for us. And that's why we're looking at these CDL requirements. So any questions now that we have a little bit better understanding on that? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Senator Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the real issue is going to be fingerprints for the hazmat certification, because that's why mine's suspended. Because not because it was a deliberate thing. I was given a choice to do that because of the requirements. They're very onerous and very costly to get electronic fingerprints done, because apparently the federal government doesn't know who you are from year to year when you renew. So if we're talking about propane, then we're talking about that federal requirement. I guess the question to you is, maybe you haven't got there, is do we have the latitude to make that choice when it comes to hazmat with the federal government, even though it's interstate? Thank you.
Ms. Zimmerman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Kolb, that is my next topic. So we will move forward into that after we went through the first 2. When you start talking about the transportation of hazardous materials on our roadways, obviously safety is the first thing that comes to mind. Director Westby said it specifically, safe, efficient, a safe, effective transportation system. Driver Services mission is to promote safety by education, evaluation, and lawfully licensing safe drivers, right? So that's our mission. That's what we do. So in 2019, the Wyoming Strategic Highway Safety Plan identified that 28% of the critical crashes occurred with drivers that were below 25 years of age. I took a little bit more information and worked with our Highway Safety Department. And in between 2018 and 2022, there were 48,500 crashes that involved drivers 18 years of age or older. 5,800 of them at 12% included drivers between the age of 18 and 19 or 18 and 20, which is what we're talking about. 21-year-old drivers right now can operate hazardous material within the state of Wyoming as long as they meet all of the requirements that are out there for the federal regulations. We are talking today about those drivers that are between the ages of 18 and 20 to be allowed to operate in intrastate commerce, which is the transportation of goods between 2 places in Wyoming that don't originate outside of the state, okay? When you're looking at that 18 to 20-year-old driver range, so when I say 12%, it doesn't seem significant. However, as of today, 18 to 20-year-old drivers made up only 3% of the drivers over the age of 21, or excuse me, over the age of 18. So 12% doesn't seem like a lot, except that 3% of the drivers are involved in 12% of the crashes. So when you start talking about safety and the education and the experience level of those younger drivers, that's where we start getting into those concerns. Back in January of 2022, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Sheila spoke about that earlier, did introduce the Safe Driver Apprentice Pilot Program, which introduced 18 to 20-year-olds operating in interstate commerce across the U.S. They specifically did not include passengers, hazardous materials, doubles and triples trailers in that program because of the safety concerns that were brought up during the rulemaking process. When we start going into the hazardous material question and what's required of the federal requirement is TSA brought that up through the Patriot Act back in 2003. We move forward as that goes through and it's really, quite honestly, it's all the federally mandated process. Where we get into the question of whether or not we can do the similar thing like we do with the age for intrastate driving for 18 to 20-year-olds that is not including the hazmat is the hazardous materials regulations themselves. So outside of the Federal Motor Carrier, we have the hazardous materials regulations and they're under CFR 49 CFR 171. And the authority under those regulations is granted by 49 USC 5101. And that specifically states that the purpose of this chapter is to protect against risk and life, property, and environment that are inherent to the transportation of hazardous materials in intrastate, interstate, and foreign commerce. What that statement says is that all of the rules that are provided in the hazardous materials regulations are required regardless of the type of transportation that is being done. One of those rules is that you get your fingerprints done. The other rule is that you're 21 years of age, amongst others, but that's the general gist behind that question.
Senator Colby, it sounds like you were spot on there. Any questions for, yes, Representative Pendergraft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just so that you understand, I was a motor sergeant for a number of years doing logistics in a transportation battalion in Europe. We had a number of 18 to 20-year-old drivers who were driving hazardous material all across Europe, including nuclear warheads. Is there any way, you gave us some data on the accident ratios for 18 to 20. Is there any way we could tap the federal records and see? I just see a kind of a duplicitous purpose in the federal regulations. You here in the States can only do it with age 21, but we over in Europe can do whatever we want because we're autonomous. I'm probably way off track here, but I would like to know more data about how dangerous these 18 to 20-year-old drivers actually are, because I've been around a lot of them and a lot of them, frankly, were very, very good drivers.
Mr. Rossetti, you're up.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Pendergraft, I think we'd have to look into that for you, but I think we could try to see if at a national level, if there was some data that would be a little bit more specific to that and provide that to you guys later.
Any further questions for YDOT surrounding the CDL information as it relates to hazardous materials, interstate? Yes, Senator Kolb.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if I heard you correctly, you're saying we can't change these when it comes to hazmat regulations. Is that correct or not correct?
You can answer that however you would like, Ms. Zimmerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Kolb. The way the regulation is stated is that, the hazardous materials regulations are the same regardless of the type of commerce you are doing.
And I guess I would go on just a hair further than that. I think it said we can change it. We just have a very serious opportunity of losing funding when we come out of compliance. So there's a very strong risk that if we go outside of this, the state of Wyoming loses some serious funding with that. Did I?
Mr. Chairman, and back to your specific question as well, Senator Kolb, we really do not have the authority to remain compliant within our CDL program if we were to try to do something in the hazardous materials realm. And if we were to do something there beyond the fiscal impacts, there's also the potential of a decertification of our CDL program in general, which could potentially jeopardize all CDLs issued in the state of Wyoming in the big picture.
Okay. Ready? Anything further? Okay, we'll go over to Ms. Furch. Ms. Furch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheila Furch, Wyoming Trucking Association. Appreciate the opportunity. I want to go back past hazmat for just a quick minute and talk about downgrade a little bit. We had an issue brought to my board's attention last fall about a person who had their license downgraded because they had failed to submit their medical certificate. They came to my board to discuss perhaps our board supporting changes to the CDL program. And following his presentation, we had a pretty lengthy, robust discussion about the current CDL process in the state of Wyoming and weren't supportive. My board took a position of not supporting a change in the downgrade process at this point. My board felt very strongly that holders of CDL licenses are held to a higher standard. That is your profession. That is your livelihood. You hold a CDL, and that comes with responsibilities. And part of that responsibility is meeting the criteria for keeping that license in place. So we are very comfortable with the downgrade process at this point. We discussed and have discussed with WYDOT, and they've been very receptive at perhaps certain exemptions, not exemptions, exceptions. Say perhaps if there's a driver who is medically disabled for 2 years, he's not able to provide a medical certificate at that time period, but does that make him any less safe if he's able to certify again? So there are items within that process that can probably be addressed, but WYDOT has been very receptive about discussing those with us. So we're very comfortable with the downgrade process that is in place for the CDL program at this point. I do want to talk a little bit about this, and this comes into what Mr. Rossetti said, as well as not really an answer to Representative Pendergrass, but kind of where we're at with that. The pilot program that was mentioned at the federal level, it is almost every state allows 18 to 20-year-olds to do intrastate commerce. And it makes absolutely no sense in the realm of the trucking industry that someone in Cheyenne couldn't cross the Nebraska state line to make a delivery, or someone in Gillette couldn't make a delivery in South Dakota. That invisible state line is that determination factor of you must be 21 years old in order to deliver this, because you are then operating in interstate commerce. So that was the impetus behind the pilot program that was enabled by Congress to take a look at 18 to 20-year-olds. No one was promoting, okay, let's put an 18-year-old in the seat of a CDL and let him drive from Washington State to Florida. That's not the process that we're taking a look at, but there has to be some way to allow for more, at least contiguous state operation at the interstate level. As Ms. Zimmerman said, there were certain restrictions that were in place. Part of that reason was because we were taking baby steps to even get past some of the anti-truck groups that were opposing allowing 18-year-olds to drive interstate. So we had to become receptive about some of the restrictions that they put in place at that point. There is an issue with that pilot program. It's unfortunate because the industry was very invested in that, and we were promoting it, and we had a lot of carriers that were very interested in participating in that. Congress enabled that. Federal Motor Carrier took that ball and made it much more onerous than what it needed to be. There are 3,000 slots in that pilot program. Right now, there are maybe a dozen of those slots filled because nobody wants to play the game that they're playing with the added restrictions, which is unfortunate because this pilot program could have gone a long ways to exacerbate the driver shortage and allowing carriers to get 18-year-olds behind the wheel of a commercial vehicle and get them in a career that could last them their lifetime. So that's kind of where we're at with that federal pilot program, why some of those restrictions are in place and how we're hoping, and we are at the federal level, pushing to get some of those rules and regulations that are currently in place loosened up so that people will want to participate in that. So that's where we are with that. We have not really discussed as a board or taken a position on the discussion about changing hazmat from 18 to 20-year-olds. Certainly, we will continue that discussion, but we do have concern about the non-compliance repercussions. We never want to see federal funding go away. We know some of the federal funding comes with strings and nobody likes that. But to lose the mix-up safety funding is very important to this trucking industry. And even more so, even as important as that is, as more so to put our CDL program in non-compliance and have the possibility of losing that program in this state, and then our CDL holders having to go into another state to get their license. That's huge. That's a huge consideration for us at this point.
I think I just heard you also say for the second time today that the federal government has made something onerous. Yeah, I just. Yes, Representative Berger.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And just have you anybody looked into the apprentice program that we've been talking about through young kids? And is there any, these 18-year-olds, especially ones that are still in high school, maybe getting exemptions on these CDLs, or have a CDL and exemption to start working on getting their licensing to take or transport hazardous materials in those apprentice programs yet? Or I know the mining industry has looked at these kids coming to those and the oil and the gas have looked them coming to their plants and getting through OSHA requirements and all those certifications so that they can start looking at possible careers there. Have we looked at that as?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger.
Sheila, yes.
Our industry is interested in that program. We've not pursued it rapidly or recently, but certainly that's kind of why the pilot program at the federal level was done, was kind of an apprentice, because it's a mentoring program at this point. There are very, very specific regulations that the industry supported as far as who they would be mentored with, what type of a driver who is already qualified and how many years that driver had been a professional driver. There are very specific requirements on the vehicle for safety devices and that type of thing, very specific equipment type of requirements on the vehicle. But the apprentice program, and that's what I referred to it as, a pilot program. This is basically a federal apprentice program.
Any further questions? Yes, Representative Smith.
So from a YDOT perspective, is there anything the state can do to help with any of the intrastate versus interstate to help make this available to more people without losing funding, without changing a whole lot of rules and regulations? Because as Ms. Zimmerman and I, we get to know each other every 2 years because of my situation with, I have an SPE certificate, which is an additional 24-page application. I have my regular medical card, but then I have to see an orthopedic specialist who doesn't know how to fill out the federal forms. And then I get denied because the form, one of the questions is, does the applicant have adequate muscle strength? And it says period. And then they say, no, I don't have adequate muscle strength to my lower left extremity, but yet they allow me to, they think I can safely drive a vehicle because my restriction is automatic transmission only. So my left leg can't use a manual clutch and all that. But then I get denied every 2 years and I have to try to downgrade my license. And that process is difficult because then my medical card has the wrong checkbox because I want interstate. So then I have to change this. And then I get finally get approved after I get another application. And so every 2 years I get denied. And then it just tells me I need to keep my crutches with me. And that's all it does.
So Representative Smith, like, is this just like perpetual for you that every 2 years? So does that process take about 2 years to get completed?
Pretty much. Yeah.
White, I'll just ask directly. I think the question that Representative Smith is asking, and we're probably all curious on, point blank, is there anything that we can do without risking the damages to our state, even if it is rewriting rules and regulations, and we authorize that would not give us the chance of losing our CDL program in the state and or tons of funding? Is there anything we can do?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Smith, I think that was actually the first time I spoke with Representative Smith was as part of this process. I do believe that the appropriate way to do this is probably through working with industry and actually trying to work with our congressional delegation, because most of those things are federal requirements. And I think it was brought up earlier too, that when those things get imposed, they're not often thought all the way through, and the impact of those often doesn't get explored at the time. I think now, as Ms. Furch mentioned, we know a little bit more. If we can push back through that delegation, be happy to work with them to do that, to try to improve that program, to actually make it useful so we could actually get the drivers there. But Mr. Chairman, I believe that would be the most appropriate way to do it, is work through our congressional delegation in DC.
Ms. Zimmerman?
If I could just add one thing specific to hazmat, right? We are currently authorizing 18 to 20-year-olds to operate in intrastate commerce in this state. We do that today. We license those drivers. It is only prohibitive for hazardous materials. So other industries are utilizing those drivers in that way. So.
All right. Yes, Representative Smith.
And I will just make a follow-up comment. Just basically, they're absolutely right. The only reason I get denied and then get my application processed is by contacting our congressional leadership in our state. And so it's always takes an act of Congress.
Literally. All right. WYDOT Truck Association, thank you guys so much. We'll go ahead and open this up to public comment.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I just have a quick question. I think some of the issues and stuff that we're having are backfilling these positions of need, these drivers. I'm not so much going to touch on the hazardous waste, but when you first started, we were talking about the requirements and stuff. So the medical card I'm in agreement with, but maybe a thing that we could look at doing and incentivizing some of these older folks to come back into the workforce would be maybe relaxing that 2-year period to maybe a 5-year period or something to have them to retest and do everything, renewed again on the road. Because if in my mind, if somebody that's done this for 40 years but chosen to retire, so they've lapsed on that too, and they can still pass their medical card, I mean, isn't it kind of common sense that maybe we don't have to put them through the driving test again?
Ms. Zimmerman and or Ms. Furch.
I'll start. Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's truly a policy decision made from this body. I mean, we choose I gave you the background on why we chose the 2 years. And if that's the direction that this body wants to go, we'll move and make those appropriate policy decisions.
Ms. Furch. I
Mr.
figure you
Chairman.
guys probably have an opinion on that.
And that was one of the things we did discuss when we were discussing the downgrade process was we're okay with the 2 years, but is it really appropriate? And are there other timeframes that might make better sense? And it's certainly something we'd be happy to take a look at to see where we could improve that, because I think that, as Misty said, it's what we chose and we were fine with it. But as this has progressed, I think it does make sense to take a look and review and see where we're at right now. And to play off of something Mr. Rossetti said a little bit earlier about talking to the congressional delegation to kind of push some of this issue. Now is an appropriate time to do that, because I think we're seeing some receptiveness at the congressional delegation. There's a bill in place right now that is taking a look at some of the waivers that were put in place with the CDL process during COVID. Because there were some states, thank God, not Wyoming, but some states that just shut down their driver's license stuff. So there were no CDLs issued and CDL licenses were expiring, and those drivers were needed and absolutely essential, and they couldn't get their licenses renewed. So there were some waivers put in place during COVID that now Congress is saying, you know what, that does kind of make sense. So I think they are more receptive right now to take a look at some of these programs, even at the federal level, not so much at what the state's doing, but at the federal level overall. So I think we're in a good place to be able to bring some of that information to their attention.
All right. Thank you guys very much. You guys were started in this direction. We'll let you go ahead and continue on up here. Majority Floor Leader Nyman and Posse. Just please introduce yourselves for the record, first and last name, and if you represent anybody, please.
Good morning, committee. Representative Chip Nyman, House District Number 1. Appreciate the opportunity to be able to address the committee today, and thank you for taking this up as an interim topic. So, and I will let these other gentlemen give their.
My name is Will Zilka. I'm with Blakeman Propane. I'm the compliance coordinator, safety, jack of all trades. I'm Ben Pravacek from Alva, Wyoming. I'm just a rancher up there, from South Dakota originally 6 years ago. So pretty new to this whole world, but just here to got my CDL as the ma'ams they mentioned earlier. I was the one that went in front of them and visited with them, but that's why I'm here.
Can I get your first name again?
Ben Pravacek.
Yep. All right, Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Chairman, it's good to see all of you, both co-chairs, everyone, Ryan. Just to give you a little bit of background on why we're here and what prompted all of this, is I was contacted by Mr. Pravacek just getting close to almost a year ago now, in relation to the fact that he was concerned about the loss of his CDL. And because of his lack of renewing his DOT physical, which is renewed every 2 years. The CDL is good for 5 years, but we've got a 2-year renewal on CDLs, DOT physicals. And he was wondering why, even though that he did not renew the DOT physical, why if after a certain amount of time that he would ultimately totally lose his CDL. And so that prompted the question of what, in my mind, what are we doing and what are other states doing in that regard? And so we started to do some research on it, and I'll let Ben elaborate on that. But I'm going to let these two gentlemen here talk to you. And then as far as Mr. Zilka from Blakeman Propane, that was the question that we had in the discussion down there when we were going through this last winter, and they were struggling to be able to get propane delivered to people. The issue is that running long hours with a shortage. And currently, the last figures I saw is that our country is short 87,000 CDL drivers. And so that's what just prompted me to look at, well, maybe we need to be relooking at how we're doing this, because if we're in a situation where we're short the ability to be able to move commerce in this nation, and I've talked to some different states that, and I will go talk a little bit about that later, that are working diligently to try to keep those CDL licenses in the hands of those drivers, that maybe Wyoming can look at some of their process and maybe do some allowances or some changes that would better reflect the need to keep our commerce moving. So that's what prompted all of this. I will defer to these gentlemen. They can relay their stories and then I'll follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. So, like I said, I got my CDL in 2003 in South Dakota. I mean, we farmed and ranched down there. That's what we did. That's what I grew up doing. Never really used it for much other than just to have it. We hauled hay, grain, silage. We did a lot of different things. So I just had it in my pocket, and it was an intrastate license, so I couldn't go out of the state, and I understood that. But so fast forward to 2017, we move out to Wyoming, and I started working for WYDOT. I just needed a job. We bought a place out there. I didn't know anybody, so I said, what the heck, I'll work for WYDOT. I'll get to know the area. So I drove plow truck. And me personally, I don't think you guys pay them enough to go out 3 a.m. to go plow them roads, because I mean, I'm pretty experienced, but you guys, anyway, that's going somewhere else. Anyway, 2017. So I've got my CDL coming into this job, and I start working for them. I will get my, go get my physical, all that up to snuff, which I thought, well, that's what we got to do. Well, in 2018, I worked for them for like 11 months, and something else came up. It was a little easier for me and my family. So now I'm the public works director also in Hewlett. Well, 2019 rolls around, then 2020. I go to, I was 22 is when I renewed my license. I find out that I don't have my CDL anymore. Unbeknownst to me that it expired in 2019. That's what it was. It expired in 2019. I didn't know the rule. I mean, in South Dakota, there's an intrastate and there's an interstate. Intrastate, you don't even need a physical on the ranch. You know, if I'm just going to haul hay for people, I don't need a physical at all. Now, if I'm crossing the border, yeah, you need a physical, you need a health card for that. But their rules and regulations state, and they're pretty well in line with North Dakota too, is you do need a physical. And if you don't, and it's every 2 years, just like Wyoming's, but if you don't go get it, and you will get downgraded to just a regular Class C license. But they don't take them away from you. You have the full length of that license in South Dakota to get it back up to snuff. So let's say I get mine taken away and I've got 3 or 4 more years left. And I go in there and say, Mr. Pravacek, do you want to get your license, your CDL renewed? We're going to need a physical. Or the option there is we just give you an intrastate. We put a K on your license. You still regain your CDL. And then a week later, I come back with my physical. I have my interstate license and away I go. And I think that to me is a better route than, I mean, you said it, sir. We get these guys in the military that fought for our rights to be free up here. And this is Wyoming, and I feel like, yeah, we got to have rules and regulations, but I think it should be on the people, shouldn't be in the state, That's me personally. And this isn't a federal thing because the federal thing states that I don't have to have a physical. I don't have to have a CDL within 150 nautical miles of my house. So I can go up and down the interstate. I can go up and down the roads, hauling grain, hauling hay, hauling cattle, and the same trucks that are going up and down I-80 without anything. And the state of Wyoming's taken my license away after 2 years because of a health card. So it's a state thing. It's not a federal thing. And I think we can fix it. If the state of South Dakota and North Dakota can do it, I think we can do it. There might be $5.9 million that we don't get, but what's that worth, and we're missing 87,000 truck drivers. I'm just a guy from South Dakota that moved to Wyoming, that lost his license. Heck, to me, I should be one of the exceptions that says if you move from out of state, and you can prove that you moved from out of state, that would really think that you don't know the rules that they have in Wyoming. The gal that just sat here was saying that same thing, that if you have a medical condition, she was stating, then they were going to try to do some exceptions. Well, it could be for out of, those exceptions could be unlimited. If you move from out of state, there could be, anyway, that's my story. There's probably more to the story, but I just hope and pray that you guys can fix this. And I've had guys say, well, it's too late for you. Yeah, but it's too late for me. And I may or may not get my CDL again. I don't know. I had it just to have it. I've driven trucks since I was 13 years old, and then I just hope and pray for the next generation. We can keep guys like this, make it easier for them to have and to keep truckers, and then the state of Wyoming to keep guys driving and not take them away. Let that decision, if we want to drive, be on us, not the state, because we have insurance. And I feel like should be sufficient enough. If we want to take the chance, and our insurance companies, and we're paying our deductibles, all in things, I think that decision should be on us, not the state's decision. But I guess if you have any questions, you can ask me, or I'll turn the floor over here.
We'll go ahead and ask for any questions for Mr. Pravacek. Yeah, Senator Cope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good day to you, sir. I'd like to ask you a question though about, I've had the same thing happen to me over my life where I didn't get my medical card renewed on time, but I didn't go past the 2 years. But for your situation, what is your opinion on, let's just say you get into that situation and you didn't get a medical card is there a certain amount of time that you think is appropriate that goes by before you decide to say, get a medical card? You know, is it 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever it may be? Because I think the other part I'd like you to, I guess, reference is experience. You know, obviously you don't drive all the time, and I understand that. But do you think if the time goes by and you haven't driven, is that going to degrade your skill level, frankly, if you are driving on interstate, let's just say? But what's your opinion? Should the time be indefinite, that you can just go get you know, your medical certificate, or should it have a sideboards to it of some sorts, like so many years, with exceptions, you know, and what, you know, there's medical exceptions. But what do you think about that?
And that's a great question. To me, if they're, I mean, it could go the length of your license. But like I said, in the state of South Dakota, they have an intrastate, which means, and in some cases, you don't even need a health card. You don't need, all you need is a CDL, and you drive up and down the roads with your trucks. So to me, it would be the length of your license. You know, if they're 5 years and they're gonna, then that would be more apt than taking them away from somebody. You know, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, just follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that I'm thinking, I think you're right. There should be some number here, but realize too that it's a 2-year medical certificate on a license with a longer amount of time. It's 5 years associated with it. So if you were at the end of your said license, right, and you got 1 year left on your license and your medical card's due, let's just say that's the scenario you're in, then you should go, what, 5 more years past that? Or, as I do agree with you, I think 5 years on an overall beginning to end makes some sense to me. But so is there any consideration you would give to what point in your license you're at for its time span? If you can understand what I'm trying.
No, I'm understanding.
Okay.
My thing is my whole deal is don't take them away from us. Just don't, you can downgrade us. That's fine. Don't take them away. Don't, you know what I mean? You just, if it's 2 years, and I mean, it's the same way. I mean, because if the license is good for 5 and your physical is good for 2 and you don't go get it renewed because you're not using it, well, then to me, yeah, you're going to get downgraded after the 2 years. And I know they give you, is it 2 years here? And that was, and I'll put all the blame on me for the 2 letters that I got. Yes, I did get 2 letters, and I was tired of working for the state and I didn't know what the heck they wanted. So I didn't want to even look at the letters. I didn't know that was a thing. So that was on me. I'll take full responsibility for that. But yeah, downgrade us, just don't take them away. Give us that opportunity, you know, and as far as I know, the state of Wyoming does not offer an intrastate license. Am I wrong?
I'm seeing a head shaking behind you that, yes, you're wrong, but we will, we can discuss that a little later. Mr. Bravacek, thank you so much for your information. We are running up against a lunchtime deadline, and you're standing between us and lunch, man. I'm telling you. No pressure on you, but this just giving the committee a heads up as far as questions. If you do have questions that we need to ask, more than happy to range that in. But Mr. Zilka,
Okay,
and thank you for your service to our state, by the way.
Well, thank you. My honor, my privilege. I will, on that note, give Captain Wyrick a little breathing room and say I'm not speaking in any way, shape, or form for the Highway Patrol. I did serve 27 plus years. So I have a little reference there on what I believe the statutes and the code said. Prior to me looking into this, I'd have bet anybody lunch that, yep, the federal regs say you cannot give an 18-year-old an endorsement in Wyoming for hazmat until someone challenged me to look for it. And that's part of the, I don't know, 11 pages that I submitted. Now, if there's more, and they're very well, it's federal regs, there are more. If there's specifics that speak against all of this, I would love to see whatever that was referenced before. My general approach to this, as we all know, we've heard it a bunch, it is hard across the board to hire qualified people. And there's two types of qualified people. There's the qualified people that meet all the base X's and O's that the feds, your insurance company, all that says, no matter what the industry. And then there's qualified people that meet all those, but don't meet your personal qualifications. There's a lot of people who have applied for us that meet all those X's and O's that don't represent us well. And this is the way I put it. We have a right to free speech in this country. Everybody does. That doesn't mean I want just anybody speaking for me. We have the rights guaranteed by the Second Amendment. That doesn't mean anybody who's got that protection is someone I necessarily want to go shooting or hunting with. So what this isn't, what I'm saying, what this isn't a request of is let us hire just any 18, 19, or 20-year-old. We just want to expand this. Now, again, I heard some of the stats or the data that was presented. One of my favorite sayings, even with the patrol, was if you torture the data long enough, it'll confess to anything. If we're talking 12% of all 18, 19, and 20-year-olds driving, what? We do have CDL holders. I want to know what their crash rate is, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, not motorcyclists, not skateboards, not SUVs. I want to know what they do. That's my question, because I'm all about safety. I made 27 plus years of my career about safety. And I taught Alive at 25. I know what the risks are for young drivers. But I'm telling you also in my career, the vast majority of crashes were not hazmat. They just weren't. They were general freight up and down the highway, and most of them were out of state. I worked 80 for 9 years. I know whereof I speak. I was a supervisor up in Gillette for 18. I don't even know the number, okay? But I'm just saying, a lot of what we end up dealing with is what, and like I said, I'd have bet lunch and lost a lot of it. I would have bet that's the way it was. The federal reg said no. And yet when you go through, it specifically states, if you're talking intrastate, the states are allowed. Now, I didn't find anything that specifically sifted out endorsements, which if it doesn't sift it out, I don't know why you would include that. Now I understand policies and regs and all that stuff. So I'm willing to admit I'm working on part of the information. I just think very often we accept what we believe we know because that's just the way it is. And that's what this is. I believed it and I've been wrong for 30 years until I looked into it. So the majority of what I'm looking at here is just if we can be allowed to look at a larger portion of Wyoming citizens. Since I've been in Wyoming, it's been this lament, young people that graduate high school and they leave us. Well, give them a reason to stay. And it's not everyone. We don't want everyone. We want the best ones. And if you make a young man or a young woman wait till they're 21 and they're capable, they're going to find another field in 3 years. And they may find another state. So I would like to think if we're up against some big, federal penalty dollar wise, I don't know what the cost of this is not tapping into this resource as we have it right now. And I'm open for questions.
Mr. Zilka, thank you again. Committee, any questions? Yes, Representative Smith.
I do appreciate you bringing out the felony issue as well. And we just passed legislation about the Restoration of Civil Rights Act. So would this be something the committee would consider restoring the CDL part of the felony? They serve their time. Why wait the 7 or the 5 or whatever when they're.
Yeah, to clarify on that point, to clarify on that point, as soon as someone gets out of the penitentiary, they can apply and get a CDL and travel coast to coast. But for a hazmat endorsement, there said 7 years from the conviction date or 5 years from release. In my humble opinion, that's nothing but punitive. Now, they do have a process to clear that up. I tried checking on it today. We're right on the borderline of that 60-day response back. I haven't heard it, what that response is yet. But again, if we're talking intrastate, the state of Wyoming, I believe the feds spell out, we've got the authority within our own boundaries to make exceptions for medical or medical cards or 18-year-old CDLs. I just don't see how that hazmat is carved out. And I open
openly admit I could just be missing something, but I would love to see that actual documentation so I can read it and then know if I'm wasting anybody's time or not.
Co-chairman.
Hey, question on the felony topic. Is that any felony or is it something that's related to or would give concern that, you know, they'd be unable to operate a hazmat vehicle?
Thank you,
Or
Senator.
is it any
It's,
felony?
it, when you fill out the form for the TSA, it is much like filling out a form for a firearm. There's a bunch of yes, no questions. Have you ever, do you ever, have you been? And then at the end of that, you fill out, you get your fingerprints and all that, and they fire back after 45 days to 2 months and say, you don't meet the requirements because of this. However, here's a process by which you can apply to. They don't make an exception, as far as I can recall, on the nature of the felony, on the nature of any of it. And again, day one, you can drive coast to coast hauling general freight. There's a disconnect there on a safety aspect that I'm looking at. Again, it's not to say that any and all should be, you know, work with some great people who have a checkered past. They're not proud of it, but they would be glad to tell you the whole story. And to say that, you know, we're going to wait 7 years, 6 years, 11 months and 29 days isn't good enough. We got to wait for that. It just seems purely punitive. Have they paid their price or haven't they?
Mr. Zilka, just to make sure I understand that. So you're only asking, do we mirror, I guess, let me ask an actual question. Do we mirror that statutory language in our rules or regulations intrastate? Or what I'm looking at is just what the federal rule says that, and I'm not belittling you or anything along those lines. I'm trying to find out. That's nothing we can do with at the federal issue. Is there something we can do at the state level that we're mirroring that language?
Again, the onerous complexity of it.
Yeah.
We default in general, please correct me if I'm wrong in this overgeneralization, but we default in general to say whatever the feds say we're going to do. Now, the feds give us some authority, we're going to carve out intrastate. And I believe from what I've seen, and again, there could be some other stuff, that the same federal regs that allow Wyoming to say 18, 19, 20 CDL holders would also allow 18, 19, 20 specific endorsement holders. We have different endorsements and restrictions that we apply intrastate, and I believe the regs allow us to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Any further questions? All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. Majority Floor Leader, thank you for bringing this forward. Do you have anything further to add?
No, just briefly, I know we've got to get out of here. It's a bad time to talk, but I thank you guys and ladies for the opportunity to be able to bring these gentlemen to you as my constituents. Senator.
Thanks for acknowledging me. I appreciate it.
Without question. I guess the only thing that I would close with would say that when this was brought to me by my constituents, it just reminded me of the reality that we have a major shortage in this nation of ability to be able to produce these products. And at our state in Wyoming, when I've had this conversation, and in fact, I called her again today as I drove down. Her name is Krista with the South Dakota Department of Transportation CDL division. And I asked her specifically, because your state allows downgraded or special type K license that do not require a DOT physical, have you as a state of South Dakota lost any federal dollars? She said, we have not lost any dollars. She says, and she said, I can explain that to anybody. She said, but we've done this, we do this, we protect those licenses, we keep them in their hands. And she said, we've lost no federal dollars on the downgrading or the being able to drive without the CDL. The issue with Mr. Zilka and with Blakeman Propane, I think it's a statewide issue. It concerns me that we do want to try to keep businesses open and make business responsible to get our young people to stay here. And I think this is a critical part of this. And if we as a state can recognize that with the ability that we have as a state to be able to work inside of our borders, it provides that much more opportunity for us to keep people employed and to develop those resources that we have here in Wyoming that we desperately need. With that, thank you very much for your time.
Yes, Senator Kolb.
Sorry for the question, Mr. Chairman, but I can't, I need clarification. Specifically, South Dakota, North Dakota, I don't care where else it is, where other state, they issue hazmat certificates, you know, to their driver's licenses in order, you know, to drive those type of vehicles within their state. I don't care if it's interstate, intrastate. Are they issuing hazmat licenses to people with CDLs without the federal government's involvement?
It's not about what the federal government's, Mr. Chairman. Senator Colt. It's not without the federal government's involvement. They do not issue hazmat endorsements to people that do not currently carry a health card. You can't also drive a passenger bus in South Dakota without a DOT health card. What South Dakota does not do is they do not remove the CDL from their drivers if they lapse their 5-year period or whatever their period is. You can drive with a CDL in South Dakota without a DOT with a K license, without a DOT physical, not hazmat.
Okay, Mr.
Yes,
Chairman.
follow.
That was my point, right? I started hearing things conflated, so I wanted to make sure I understood this. Thank you for clarification.
Okay, committee, unless there's any further questions. No further questions. Okay, I'm going to take chairman's prerogative on this, and I just conferred with my co-chairman. I'm going to direct YDOT for our next meeting to work, and I'll just look at Taylor, Misty, and Darren here. Work with your counterparts in North Dakota and South Dakota, as they were the ones specifically mentioned. If you guys can report back to the committee exactly what their process is, what it looks like, and how that differentiates between what Wyoming has, and then also that just maybe a refresher as we come back to the next meeting, what that would look like for us if we were to adopt something along those lines. And then in the next committee meeting, what we'll do is, depending upon that output, we'll look at potential bill draft for our third meeting. But I think there's a little bit more to unpack here than in just one meeting to direct a bill draft and say, let's go with this. I think there's some ramifications we need to look at. So why don't you guys good with that? I'm getting a thumbs up from Rosetti. So, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Committee, anything further before we break for lunch? Okay, we're only 12 minutes behind schedule, so not too bad. We are going to be back at 1:30, so an hour and 15 minutes. And